Luke 4 telling of the temptations of Christ, the importance of the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit leading, and his deep thoughts the better to converse with solitude, till far from track of men, thought following thought, and step by step led on, he entered now the bordering desert wild, and with dark shades and rocks environed round, his holy meditation thus pursued. And starting now, at roughly line 185 to 195, we have this interesting kind of first view of Christ, Son of God, as a being who is trying to figure out what it is that's really going on, right, in his life. What am I supposed to do? We now will have from 196 to 293 the famous Christ's soliloquy. And this one will, for us, hark back to Adam's soliloquy, of course, after the forbidden fruit had been eaten and all of that. That was a powerful soliloquy. Here we have a soliloquy that will border, of course, butt up next to Shakespeare's famous soliloquies. Oh, what a multitude of thoughts at once awakened in me. Swarm. It's an interesting word, right, given Paradise Lost and the swarming of all the different demons and stuff. While I consider what from within I feel myself, and hear what from without comes often to my ears, ill sorting with my present state compared. When I was yet a child, no childish play to me was pleasing. All my mind was set serious to learn and know, and thence to do what might be public good. Myself, I thought, born to that end, born to promote all truth, all righteous things. We should point out that there's a Luke 2 story about Jesus as a young boy, but there's not a lot of stories about Jesus as a young boy. Some of the apocryphal stories about Christ as young boy are fascinating. I'll let you do your own research there. Milton's Christ, however, as he begins this process of now going into the wilderness, and the soliloquy that will attend it. We're going to pay close attention to these lines because I think this is the heart of Paradise Regained. I believe that when you read this poem, if you really appreciate what it is that is the point of Christ going through this temptation, we've already heard from God what that point is. Now we're going to hear from Christ the Son what that point is. And he says it. It was all about learning and knowing so he could do. Again, we're back to this notion of obedience. Therefore, above my years, the law of God I read and found it sweet, made it my whole delight, and in it grew to such perfection that ere yet my age had measured twice 6 years at our great feast, I went into the temple there to hear the teachers of our law. Again, we're to the Luke 2 passage 46 to 50, and to propose what might improve my knowledge or their own, and was admired by all. Let's just point out that we're back to this notion of knowledge, and what knowledge is good and how one should acquire it. And let's also point out that there's admiration that's given to the young Christ, and the biblical account in Luke tells us that this is the case as well. Admired by all. That will be significant because later Satan, as one of his temptations, is going to say, I'll give you all the glory and you will be admired. We'll already point out that Christ has known some of that in his youth. Yet this is not all to which my spirit aspired. Victorious deeds flamed in my heart. Heroic acts, we immediately think of Homer here. One while to rescue Israel from the Roman yoke, then to subdue and quell o'er all the earth, brute violence and proud tyrannic power, till truth were freed and equity restored. In other words, he says, early on when I realized I had tremendous power, one thought was to simply destroy the Romans who are the conquerors of the Jews, and then to restore the kingdom, if you will, of David on earth, right, in all of that. Yet held it more humane, more heavenly, first by winning words to conquer willing hearts, and make persuasion do the work of fear, at least to try and teach the erring soul, not wistfully misdoing, but unaware, misled, the stubborn only to subdue. The original text, by the way, for this word subdue is actually destroyed. And we think here several key moments, don't we, as we think about this idea. Of course, first of all, we think of those opening lines of Plato's Republic, a text that I believe for Milton is constantly ever present in his mind. Remember those opening lines. How can we hear if we refuse to listen? Remember those opening lines there. The argument that Socrates makes in the opening lines of Republic 1, back to our lectures on that, is, can we not, instead of fight physically, can we fight with language? Can I try to persuade you? Here as well, Christ says, I'm aware that most men act not out of mean intentions, but simply out of, well, what are the lines from when Christ is on the cross? Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Of course, the idea is as well presented in Plato's Book 7, the cave allegory. They're looking on the shadows on the wall. Right. They think that they're real, and they're not real, right? Okay. These growing thoughts, to continue. My mother's sin, perceiving by words at times, cast forth, inly rejoiced, and said to me apart. So now we get mother in the soliloquy, speaking, and Christ remembering. High are thy thoughts, O son, but nourish them, and let them soar to what height scarce sacred virtue and truth worth can raise them, though above example high. By matchless deeds express thy matchless sire. For know, thou art no son of mortal men. Thou men esteem thee low of parentage. Thy father is the eternal king. This is the incarnation story. Who rules all heaven and earth. Angels and son of men. A messenger from God foretold thy birth, conceived in me a virgin. He foretold thou shouldst be great and sit on David's throne. And of thy kingdom there should be no end. By the way, 1680 text reads, there shall be no end, instead of should be no end. At thy nativity, a glorious choir of angels in the fields of Bethlehem sung to shepherds, watching at their folds by night, and told them the Messiah now was born, where they might see him. And to thee they came, directed to the manger where thou layest, for in that inn was left no better room. A star, where stars matter in Paradise Brigade, not seen before in heaven appearing, guided the wise men thither from the east. This is the story of the Magi, to honor thee with incense, myrrh, and gold, by whose bright course led on they found the place, affirming at thy star new graven in heaven, by which they knew thee King of Israel born. Just Simon and prophetic Anna, two important people in the Luke story about older people who identify Christ as somehow important, the Messiah. Warned by vision, found thee in the temple, and spake before the altar and the vested priest like things of thee to all that present stood. Thus, having heard straight, I again revolved the law and prophets, searching what was writ concerning the Messiah to our scribes, known partly, and soon found of whom they spake. I am. This chiefly, that my way must lie through many a hard assay, that is to say, a trial, even to the death, ere I the promised kingdom can attain, or work redemption for mankind, whose sins full weight must be transferred upon my head. Line 267, we think of Isaiah 53, verse 6. Yet neither thus disheartened or dismayed, the time perplexed I waited, when behold the Baptists, of whose birth I oft had heard, not knew by sight, now come, who was to come before Messiah and his way prepared. This is the echoing of the Isaiah 40 verse 3 passage. I, as all others, to his baptism came, which I believed was from above, but he straight knew me. This is the John the Baptist story told again, right? We're going to get this for the third time already. And with loudest voice proclaimed me him, for it was shown him so from heaven, me, him, whose harbinger he was, and first refused on me baptism to confer, so much is greater, and was hardly won. But as I rose out of the laving stream, heaven opened her eternal doors. Here we think of the Psalm 24, 7 through 9, everlasting doors, from whence the Spirit descended on me like a dove. And last, the sum of all my Father's voice, audibly heard from heaven, pronounced me his beloved Son, in whom alone he was well pleased, by which I knew the time now full, that I no more should live obscure, and openly begin as best becomes the authority which I derived from heaven. And now by some strong motion I am led into this wilderness, to what intent I learn not yet. Perhaps I need not know. Line 293, 294. For what concerns me, for what concerns my knowledge, God reveals. We think of of course, Gabriel's suggestions in Paradise Lost, Book 7, and of course, Michael's, that if you need to know something, God will let you know. There's so many things going on here in this soliloquy, but let's just phrase it with three, all right? One, Christ is going back over his early years, and he's looking for some kind of understanding of what exactly it is he was born for. Two, he has had experiences in his youth that he knows are significant and will lead him to the moment that is soon to come in terms of his mission, the work. And of course, the words of his mother will be very important, he will believe, in understanding something important is about to happen. Number three, it is clear that this Milton's Christ is aware that he has to be tested, and he is still looking for knowledge. And as those last lines say, perhaps I need not know. In other words, I don't have to know everything. This will be for Milton faith, right? For what concerns my knowledge, God reveals. In other words, it's all going to work out. I know, I knew, the time was full, he says earlier in that soliloquy, and now it's time. We're told then that that there's going to be a project coming, and he's aware of it, right? He's aware of it. We finish then at line 293. At 294, we continue. So spake our morning star. Then in his rise, and of course, morning star here, we think of Revelation 22:16, right? And looking round on every side, beheld a pathless desert. Again, we think of Dante. I mean, Milton is tipping his hat to all the great epics, right? Okay, and of course, we were reminded that in Dante, the opening lines of Divine Comedy, there he is, not in a desert, but something akin in terms of a pathless wood, a dark wood. Dusk with horrid shades. We come back to the word horrid from Paradise Lost. The way he came, not having marked return, was difficult. By human steps untrod. Much has been made of what Milton actually means by this human steps untrod. Is he saying that Christ was the first man to walk in this metaphoric desert? I like to think of it as that things unattempted yet in prose and rhyme of Milton. In other words, Christ is on his way to do something nobody else has ever done before. And he still was led. But with such thoughts accompanied of things past and to come, we think of Proust and his classic text, the idea of trying to understand everything from the past brings me to this moment, and then of course things to come. Lodged in his breast as well might recommend such solitude before choicest society. The word solitude, solitary, is of course the adjective last used in Paradise Lost, solitary way. In other words, in the same way that Adam and Eve will leave Eden and go out into the world, here we have the Son of God in Christ doing something very similar. Then we get to some numerology that's significant. Let's take a look at this one now at line 303. 40 days he passed, whether on hill, sometimes anon in shady vale, each night under the covert of some ancient oak or cedar, to defend him from the dew, or harbored in one cave, is not revealed, nor tasted human food, nor hunger felt till those days ended, hungered then at last among wild beasts. They at his sight grew mild. We're back to Eden again, right? Nor sleeping him, nor waking harmed his walk. The fiery serpent fled, and noxious worm, the lion and fierce tiger glared aloof. In other words, 40 days, he's in the wilderness, and there alone. Now, what is up with 40? Well, let's say at least three things about that. Deuteronomy 8:20 and Deuteronomy 9:9, of course, the children of Israel, after their exodus, will be in the wilderness for those 40 years before they enter the promised land. The great prophet Elijah will have his 40 days in the wilderness, 1 Kings 19:8. And of course, let's put it this way, the hunger motif, right? I mean, for those of you that have grown up with this Hunger Games idea, the notion of the hunger motif is central. And it's going to be central, obviously, in this first book when we get to the first temptation of Christ, right? You're 40 days without eating. I'll let you Google what that does physically to the human body for the individuals who have tried to go for 40 days without eating anything. Now, obviously, you got to drink something, but to go without any kind of food for 40 days, and what's involved in that. Now, fasting was a huge part, of course, of the tradition of mystical training by monks in the early Christian tradition, and of course in a lot of other traditions as well. We even think, don't we, of Gautama Buddha, who went through his ascetic period, remember, with his 6 grains of rice a day, and he basically tore up his health so badly he almost died. Here, the hunger motif is huge. The bread temptation, of course, will lead us to the John 6:35, where Christ will say, I am the bread of life. So Milton is clearly playing lots of games with us. When? At line 314. Let's read. But now, there he is in the wilderness, Christ alone. But now, an aged man, and we immediately think of W.B. Yeats' Sailing to Byzantium. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. An old man shows up. Now, of course, we know that this is going to be Satan in disguise. In Paradise Lost, he played with all different kinds of disguises, from snakes to toads to everything else. And here, an old man in rural weeds, following as seemed the quest of some stray ewe, or withered sticks to gather, which might serve against a winter's day, when winds blown keen to warm him wet returned from field to eve, he saw approach. Now, this is an old man picking up sticks. And for those of us who are readers of the first 5 books of the Bible, we immediately think of the Numbers 15:33 passage. I'll let you look at it on your own. This is a story they don't teach you in Sunday school regularly. Of course, it's the story of a man picking up sticks on the Sabbath, and for that he is stoned to death. I think Milton is intentionally playing an illusion game here for us. An old man picking up sticks, and then we're told, who first with curious eye perused him, then with words thus uttered spake. Now, we definitely want to take a look and put in parallel the way Satan as serpent will speak to Eve about the fruit of the forbidden tree. Wow, that has something to do with eating too, doesn't it? And the first temptation here as Satan will speak. Sir, let's take a look and see what he says. Starting at line 321, he begins with a question. What ill chance hath brought thee to this place so far from path or road of men who pass in troop or caravan? For single none durst ever, who returned and dropped not here his carcass, pined with hunger and with drought. In other words, the only people that come out here are people who want to die of starvation. I ask the rather and the more admire. Notice that Satan begins with questions and with flattery. Sounds just like what he did with Eve, doesn't it, right? For that to me thou seemest the man whom late our new baptizing prophet at the ford of Jordan honored so, and called thee Son of God. I saw and heard. For we sometimes who dwell in this wild, constrained by want, come forth to town or village nigh. Nighest is far. What ought we hear? And curious are to hear what happens new. Fame also finds us out. In other words, he says at line 334, wait, are you the guy that I saw, who when he was being baptized, so this is the 4th, the 5th time maybe that this reference is being made here to Christ being referenced in his baptism as the Son of God. And here he says, are you the guy? Line 335, we have the response, to whom the Son of God, who brought me hither, will bring me hence. No other guide I seek. So in other words, this is what, of course, Eve should have just said to shoot down Satan at the very beginning. Whoever brought me here will take me out of here. I'm not worried about my future. Of course, the temptation now is set up at line 342 as by miracle he may, replied the swain, the old man. What other way I see not. For we here live on tough roots and stubs, to thirst inured, more than the camel and to drink go far. Men to much misery and hardship born. But if thou be the Son of God, now we are, of course, to the Luke 4 passage, or the Matthew 4 passage, command that out of these hard stones be made thee bread. So shalt thou save thyself, and us relieve with food, whereof we wretched seldom taste. In other words, and Milton adds to the story here and the temptation of the devil, why don't you go ahead and take some rocks, turn them into food, that way you can save yourself and you can save us as well. right? Of course, it will be at this point, he ended, the Son of God replied, thinkest thou, line 346, thinkest thou such force in bread? Is it not written, Deuteronomy 8:3, for I discern the other than thou seemest. We think of the way Shakespeare loves to use the word seem. Remember, it will be Hamlet saying to his mother, Name Adams not seems, but is. I have that within which passeth show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe. Thou seemest, man lives not by bread alone or only, but each word proceeding from the mouth of God, who fed our fathers here with manna. And, of course, Christ is referencing back to those wandering in the wilderness. How can the children of Israel survive? Manna from heaven is appropriated, etc., right? And he says, if God provided that then for the children of Israel, then why should I be worried? In the Mount, Moses was 40 days, nor ate nor drank. And 40 days Elijah without food wandered this barren waste. Again, notice Milton here then is now putting Christ not only on par with Moses and Elijah, but of course superseding. Without food, wandered this barren waste, the same I now. Why dost thou then, notice the question of Christ, suggest to me distrust, knowing who I am as I know who thou art? And of course, it's at this point that we realize that we've got referencing here to all kinds of biblical stories. For Moses, the Exodus 24:18. For Elijah, the 1 Kings 19:8 passage. And it will be here, of course, that we'll see it, that Christ sees through the disguise, doesn't he, of Satan. And we're as well thinking about already that high point in the Christian story of what's often referred to as the transfiguration. Now you want to put that in your notes, and we're going to come back to that notion again, where Elijah and Moses are going to